I love Ace Attorney. I love this series like it's my own son. It even has the same qualities as a real son, like being a disappointment. Ace Attorney is one of my favorite franchises. I can't get enough of it. It's really the only franchise I can think of that I ever got like hyper fixated on. I would not shut up about it, so much so that my brother, who's notorious for having a bad memory for knowing what kind of stuff I like, remembered that I liked this series and tried to get me an Ace Attorney poster since I wouldn't shut the fuck up about it. While I've definitely mellowed out about it over time, I still really love it. Look at my profile picture on Discord. Look at my profile picture on AO3. Don't ask why I have an AO3 account. I'd love to talk about this series more, but look at these videos. Look at them. You think I got anything new to add to the conversation? Anyway, it makes me happy to see all these collections coming out. The original trilogy reinvigorated the franchise, allowing the fan base to grow to the largest it's ever been. We got the Great Ace Attorney localized. The Apollo Justice trilogy just came out. And the Investigations duology is getting released, localizing the second game for the first time. All hail Eustace! It also means that, with the exception of one, the entire series is now available for modern consoles. Now that we have all of these, the question that will naturally be asked is, what does the future of this franchise hold? I'm going to try to be as reasonable as I can with a lot of these predictions of what I think is going to happen. I thought about having a section that's supposed to be like a crack pipe dream future, but personally I don't really want much aside from, well, Ace Attorney 7. Like, I'd obviously like more, but I'll take what I can get. Okay, let's just go ahead and get the super obvious one out of the way first. Ace Attorney 7. Yeah, I'm pretty certain it's happening. There's no more games to re-release. Capcom, you have no choice. I mean, it's just kind of a no-brainer. Ace Attorney right now is more popular than it's ever been before. All the games are now available for anyone to jump into and give a try. We do know at some point Ace Attorney 7 was in active development due to those Capcom leaks like 4 years ago. Now, it's most likely that whatever Ace Attorney 7 that was in development then has been scrapped for whatever reason, as that was in early 2021 and now we're in like mid-2024. And Ace Attorney does not really come off as a franchise that would need a 3 to 4 year development cycle. Even if this ended up being the biggest Ace Attorney game yet, it would probably still not take that long. I think what most likely happened was that the first trilogy released, it was an incredible success, so obviously Capcom wanted to capitalize on it by releasing a new game, so after some time, got to work on Ace Attorney 7. I think that whatever this version of Ace Attorney 7 they were working on was most likely going to be another game starring Phoenix Wright, which, you know, makes sense. Many people who hopped into the franchise thanks to this original trilogy re-release would not be particularly interested in a new game starring some characters they know jack diddly squat about. So Ace Attorney 7 starring Phoenix Wright was underway. At the same time, the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles was happening. I remember being pretty shocked that this was the collection they decided to do next, but when you think about it, despite its initial failure, it was probably the one that was the simplest to do. They were both 3DS games that shared lots of assets, didn't really have any styles clashing, with one game needing to go through a completely different process of cleaning up the visuals compared to the others. And since it was never translated, Capcom figured they could just give it an English one and then leave it at that, not really bothering with any other language. All of this which would help keep the budget down, so it was probably pretty cheap. Ultimately a low-risk remastering they could put out. Capcom didn't really have a lot of expectations for this thing. In the leaked document, it stated that they were expecting it to sell about 135,000 copies within the first year and 500,000 total. Well, when the game released, expectations completely soared past that and sold 500,000 copies in less than a year, and recently sold over 1 million. I think it's possible that this success completely changed Capcom's trajectory for the future of the franchise. Why do I think this? Well, the 4, 5, and 6 trilogy was considered for release, but only if both Ace Attorney 7 and the Great Ace Attorney did well. The reason being that it would be pretty expensive to make, at least compared to the other collections. Well, 2.5 years later, here we are, with the sequel trilogy and Ace Attorney 7 nowhere to be seen, as well as the Edgeworth Investigations duology, which wasn't mentioned at all in the document. I think it's clear that the Great Ace Attorney not only exceeded expectations, but did so in such a massive way it caused Capcom to completely redo all their priorities of what to do next for these games. But it seems kind of weird though, right? Why would making a brand new game in the franchise that's now doing better than ever not be the right call? They were already working on it. Well, I personally think that whatever they had planned for the original Ace Attorney 7 got completely scrapped. If we go based on what I think the original plan was, i.e. Phoenix being the main protagonist, I think it's possible that Capcom might have dropped that idea, since the Great Ace Attorney showed that you don't need to have Phoenix or his pals to be in a game for it to be successful. In fact, I think it's possible that Capcom started realizing that trying to forcefully shove Phoenix into the main lead of every game has been damaging the series as a whole. Why do I think they came to realize this? Well, it's because both of the sequel trilogy and most recently the Investigations compilation. For the Apollo Justice trilogy, it's the first time in a very long time where Capcom chose not to push Phoenix Wright. I say chose because with the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles, they literally couldn't do it. Like, the best they could do was mention that he was Phoenix Wright's ancestors. You couldn't put him on the fucking box. But here, they instead put the spotlight on Apollo Justice, even naming the collection after him, at least here in the West. And I noticed for the Investigations duology, they dropped the whole putting the character's name in the title thing altogether. It's not called the Ace Attorney Investigations Collection Miles Edgeworth, or something along those lines. And the second game's new title doesn't even have Edgeworth's name in it at all. It's just called Ace Attorney Investigations Prosecutor's Gambit. Kick-ass name, by the way. It seems to me that Capcom's trying to sell these games more based on the fact that they're Ace Attorney games rather than Phoenix Wright games, which is why I think these came out first, to get this newfound audience to recognize this franchise in a new way, so they don't make the same mistake they did last time and keep themselves shackled to Phoenix. You have the Phoenix trilogy, and then you have this duology, completely separate, and then you have the Secret trilogy starring an all-new lead with a new cast of wacky characters, and of course you have the Investigation spin-off with Edgeworth and only him with his new cast. When you really think about it, Phoenix hasn't had the spotlight at all in recent times. Like, obviously he's still there. He was still featured in some of the advertising for the Apollo Justice trilogy. 2 of the games have his name in it, for God's sakes. And he's still ultimately forever going to be the face of the franchise when it's talked about and presented in a more general way. Like, if Ace Attorney ever crosses over with anything, it's always gonna have Phoenix in it, obviously. Well, unless it involves golf, because I guess he hates that shit. But my point is that Capcom is making an effort to separate Phoenix from the games. And I think they're doing it now because I don't think the next game is going to star Phoenix. Who will it star? I don't know, but I don't think it's going to be him. Hell, no matter who it is, I don't think their name is going to make it on the title regardless. Like, even if Athena's made to be the main lead, it's probably not going to be called Athena Sykes Ace Attorney. I really babbled for a while for me to basically say, yeah, I think Ace Attorney 7 might not have Phoenix as the lead. There you go, there's your TLDR. Hey, I wouldn't mind if they dropped Phoenix. I like him, but I feel like he's run his course. Okay, well, I was gonna say that I think it was gonna release sometime in the summer of next year, but then I realized something. Who's making it? And I don't mean like the company, like obviously it's Capcom. Gee, I can't wait for the next Ace Attorney game by fucking Phoenix Games. Imagine the reveal trailer, Phoenix would look like this. But like within Capcom, there's the Ace Attorney team that handles the franchise. For a while, there's been at least 2 teams starting in the DS era. You had Shu Takumi with the A team making Apollo Justice and then the crossover, and then you had the B team making the investigation games. Eventually, the B team started making the mainline games while Shu Takumi and his team made the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles. But after that, I always thought that Capcom may have cut down to 1 team, maybe reshuffling them around the company, causing them to only have 1 for the past 5 years. They have only been putting out collections. But either that was never the case, or maybe they have multiple teams again, since they were able to put out 2 collections in 1 year. The Apollo Justice Trilogy and the Investigations Collection. No way the same team made both of these at the same time. And in a recent interview, some of the people involved with the collection came out and gave us some insight. They said when they started the development of the Apollo Justice Trilogy, the Investigations Collection followed shortly after. Now, I'm no development expert, but I think this would basically confirm that these 2 games were in development at the same time, meaning we do, at the very least, have 2 separate teams working on different Ace Attorney projects, which is pretty cool. However, if there are only 2 teams, then I would actually think it's pretty unlikely for Ace Attorney 7 to release the next year, since it probably would only get started after the Apollo Justice Collection was finished. Now, I suppose it's not impossible for them to be able to make a game in about a year and a half, but these games have only been getting bigger and bigger, and I imagine Ace Attorney 7 will be the biggest game yet, so it might be more likely to release the year after next. And then again, maybe perhaps there's more than 2 teams. Now, I don't think there's 3 separate teams working on full-blown projects. What I imagine is that they might have had 3 smaller teams. Team 1 working on the Apollo Justice Collection, Team 2 working on the Investigations Collection, and Team 3 working on the beginning parts of Ace Attorney 7, like concept art and deciding the direction of the game. Once the Apollo Justice Trilogy and the Investigations duology gets released, those 2 teams will merge with the Ace Attorney 7 team and allow the game to enter full development. Of course, there's also the team that made the Ghost Trick remaster, which would probably be a different group entirely than these fools, but that's just starting to get confusing to keep track of. Anyway, saying it out loud, I actually think the whole 3 smaller teams eventually merging into 1 big team for Ace Attorney 7 might be the most likely option. As good as these collections are, they'll probably still require smaller teams in a full game, so you know what? I'm gonna go with the prediction that it'll come out sometime late 2025, early 2026. That's my official prediction. You can kill me if I'm wrong. Now that I laid out my predictions for Ace Attorney 7, which, oh my word, took way longer than I thought. This was supposed to be a smaller video. Why do I keep doing this to myself? Well, anyway, what about after Ace Attorney 7? What would come next? I have a couple of big predictions that I think will happen. Let's get the kind of crazy one out of the way first. I think the original trilogy will be updated to be more in line with the other collections. Looking back, it kind of seems bare bones compared to the other ones that came out recently. I know it seems like an out there idea. Why would Capcom go backwards and put effort in a game that's already been released? And not just that, it already sold pretty well too, so why waste time and resources on it. Well, you see, my friend, there are still ways Capcom can profit off this idea. For one, the most obvious, they could add new languages to the collection, like Spanish and Italian. By adding those, they would open up their game to a new audience, which would equate to new sales. The second thing is that the original trilogy was never released physically outside of Japan. Here in the US of A, we got all the other games physically released, only on Switch, but you know, we still got them. So it kind of makes it odd that the original trilogy, the best selling out of the bunch, just kind of doesn't have one. So they could release a physical version while advertising the update, and you know many people would double dip, you disgusting animals. You're not supposed to do that. It's like putting your entire mouth in the bowl. Okay, that's actually not true. Mythbusters did an episode on that, and the bacterial consequence is actually quite minimal. They also did an episode on ripping ass. I think Capcom would do it. It'd be another way to try to sell the original trilogy again, since they love doing that so much. Look at all these versions. It's insane. They even put it on the Wii. Why did they do that? So I think it's very possible that they'll do something like an update to the original trilogy to try to get more sales out of it. That's my first prediction. The next one is that I think we'll see the Professor Layton vs. Phoenix Wright crossover release. It's the last one that hasn't seen a major re-release. Of course, it would be a little more complicated for two reasons. One is that Capcom would need to go through level 5 to get their approval, since they own half the game. It's like a divorced family with a kid stuck in the middle. But I don't think it would be too difficult for Capcom to get level 5 to agree. I'm sure they would be more than happy to release this game on modern platforms. The other issue is the fact that it's only a single game. Unlike Capcom's other re-releases, which were all compilations of multiple games, this is just a singular 10-year-old 3DS game. Now, I don't think that would be enough to stop Capcom or Level 5 from re-releasing it. It is a pretty poor reason not to do something like that. But I do have to wonder how it would be priced. Would they sell it for $30? $40? Would they actually try adding some new content to it to bolster it up and justify the price? They really haven't done something like that since the first game on the DS, so that would be pretty cool. I suppose that would fall on whoever's publishing it. Level 5 published the original game, which is why it's localized in many different languages that were never done in Ace Attorney before, like Dutch, since previous Professor Layton games have been localized in those languages. It would also probably actually be released physically worldwide, since Level 5 isn't as much as a bitch when it comes to that kind of thing. Now, if this was happening, when would it come out? I really don't know. Would Level 5 want to re-release this before any other Professor Layton game? Would it be the game to finally push them into doing that? It probably won't happen until New World of Steam releases at the very least, as well as the 4 other projects they're working on. Jesus Christ. Lots of factors to consider. But I do think it'll come one day, and I'm sure it would be Capcom that would approach Level 5 to push for it. It's after this point which I think the future of Ace Attorney gets a little fuzzy. A lot could happen after this. Ace Attorney 8, maybe a new great Ace Attorney game, maybe an entirely new Ace Attorney spinoff. Maybe Shu Takumi is working on an entirely new original IP, not connected to the Ace Attorney Ghost Trick or anything else. Hell, we might even get an Ace Attorney x Danganronpa crossover. That could happen. Can't wait for the chapter where Phoenix defends a pedophile. He'll truly be following the footsteps of his late mentor after that. It just kind of hit me that after a certain length of time, it's really hard to predict anything, because so much can happen between now and then, whether it's behind the scenes, in the real world, whether the games sell well enough, things like that. But at the end of the day, I really have no basis on what to make these predictions on at all, aside from the fact that, I don't know, they could happen. I think the only concrete prediction I feel like I could make, even way after the point of like Ace Attorney 7 and the crossover, is the fact that I think the mainline series is going to be consistent for a while. I think we're going to get Ace Attorney 8 and Ace Attorney 9 after that, assuming that the sales don't just fucking fall off a cliff. But honestly, I think realistically, that's where I'm going to have to put my predictions to rest. I'd love to talk about the things of like a possibility of an Ace Attorney x Danganronpa crossover, but I don't know, that's such an out there idea that there's nothing I can really of substance be able to predict with that. Just that, I don't know, it could happen, maybe. At least the other stuff I could somewhat say, okay, with the evidence provided and the things and the course of the way the direction society seems to be going, you know, at least I could pretend to know what I'm talking about. So I think I'm gonna go ahead and cut the predictions short. I could go longer, but I really see no reason to at this point. I guess the overall reason why I'm making this video at all is just because I'm really optimistic about the future of this franchise. And while it's amazing to get all these collections and even localizations, it is also sad to see that in terms of new games, it all kind of just sort of stopped. So the fact that things seem to be picking up again, you know, it makes me excited. Now that you've sat through my insane ramblings, what are your guys' predictions? I'd love to see what you all think will happen. Do you think maybe for the next game we'll finally be able to see Phoenix and Edrith have raw on-screen sex?